welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we are sewing. We are finally in spring enough that I can get flowers I like again. I'm pretty excited about that. We are going to be sewing through my stash. This is the first project of the year of my $50 and less supply run. So the goal of this project is for it to come out at less than $50 because I want to show that sewing is accessible. If you can get your fabric secondhand and stuff, you can make it. On this channel, a lot of times I'm creating gowns that are like over $100 to $200 to make. And I just want to show that like for day-to-day wear, you can definitely spend way less on fabric and still come out with a result you're really, really proud of, and that's really high quality, but stays under that $50 price point. I mean, of course, like fast fashion like Shein or Temu are going to hit under that $50 price point for a dress, but those are, I'm not going to get into what those are. Those are slightly different than your other fast fashion brands like Gap, H&M and stuff, where you might start to see dresses hovering more around that $50 price point. So I'm going to try to get this price point as low as possible today. So I will introduce you to my fabrics and my pattern. First up, I've had this fabric in my stash for several years. This was a very early fabric that I bought, and it's this really gorgeous navy rayon with like these cute little flocked flowers on it. And I have really wanted to use it, like I said, for a really long time and just hadn't yet. So we're finally using it today. And this fabric was actually voted on by my Patreon/Ko-Fi membership people. So if you want a say on what projects I do next, definitely sign up for those monthly memberships. They're at $5. Get to help steer the direction of this channel as well as see early releases and what I am up to. As for the pattern, we have this gorgeous 1940s pattern. I've had this for a long time. It is going to be a little small, so I am going to have to make it a little bit bigger for me, but that is totally a-okay. It is a junior Mrs. and Mrs. daytime or evening dress. The bodice is a slimly dart fitted and joins a gather skirt and a scallop seam. That's what I'm most excited and nervous about, is this beautiful scallop seam detail that you see. Style 2, the heart-shaped neckline. Front, button, closing, and skirt are trimmed with braid. I'm not going to trim them though. And then in style 3, there is just like a lace version. I am kind of tempted to do lace on this, so I am gonna poke through my stash, see what I have, but part of me says that I should really let the fabric shine and skip the lace, so we'll see what I actually end up doing here. I just think it would be really, really cute. So I think I'm probably gonna stick to short sleeves because they are 3/4 length sleeves, and that's not my favorite, and I want this dress to be nice and flexible into springtime and not feel like such a winter dress. Also, I just don't like long sleeves that much unless they're kind of poofed sleeves like this. But yeah, this hopefully shouldn't be too challenging of a project. The scalloping is always kind of challenging, but they're big scallops, so I'm hoping that'll make it easier. Today my goal is to cut out the fabric and hopefully get the bodice pretty close to done. I am going back and forth whether with this fabric I might want to do a bound buttonhole, but I also just don't know if I have the energy for a bound buttonhole, so we're gonna see what I decide. Definitely gonna need to pull out some interfacing for this. We're gonna go ahead and hop into cutting out this fabric. First things first, I'm here tracing this sleeve pattern piece because I am going to alter it a bit. I need it to be about 2 inches wider around the bicep, and then also to match some of the widening I'm doing for the waist of this dress, I am going to need to widen the sleeve accordingly so it will still fit in the hole. I know that's technically not the correct way to do this, the way that you see me do, but it works for me, so I'm going to keep doing it this way. I have traced the pattern and then I'm cutting it out. And after that, I am going to put a slit up the middle of the sleeve so then I can eventually pull it apart and make it fit my biceps in it. I have learned that tight arms are a no-go for me anymore now that I know how to fix the issue. So because of that, I take the time to do this alteration on almost every single pattern I use now. I will say learning to alter my own patterns has truly been a game changer for me. I feel like there were things about patterns before this that I would just deal with the different issues it would give me, but now I'm much less likely to compromise, and I spend the time making the pattern pieces fit my body, which is of course one of the biggest reasons you sew, is so that way things fit the way you would like them to. And Spooky has decided that she wants to be very in the way today, but I am going to persevere nonetheless. So here I am laying out my pattern pieces on the fabric, following all the marks and grains and stuff like that. My plan is to cut the whole thing out with French seams. However, things did not go according to plan because of course I forgot to do the French seam placement for the rest of the garment. So, whoops. It happens. It's definitely not ideal though. Like pretty much every other pattern in the universe, I am starting by marking my dart lines and pinning those together to get them ready to sew. Sewing these is always pretty straightforward once you get used to it. You just sew along the line that you marked and then you get as close as you can to the edge, do a few more stitches to taper off the dart and not get a pucker, and then at least for me, I will tie it off. I know there's other ways to do this, but I prefer the tying off method. Here I am going to press the darts to make sure they face the way I want them to. I am only pressing this fabric on the back side because flocking will come off if the iron touches it. And with this being kind of like a shinier rayon, I'm more likely to have iron marks be at risk, so not ironing on the front is ideal. To be able to put the front and back together, I'm first starting by sewing the back pieces together. I added a zipper opening in the back because that is my preference over those pesky side zippers, so I have to add in the step to put in that foundation for my zipper. Once that is sewn, I am now sewing the front and pieces together at the shoulders and sides. I've sewn them together, and what you see me doing here is because I forgot to do the French seam preparation of cutting for the bodice, I have decided to use this navy bias binding from my stash to finish the edges. With fabrics like these, I don't really like to use pinking because a lot of times it will get very frayy and not great, so I opted for a seam binding. With a seam binding on, I am again pressing from the back side only. I am able to use a little bit of steam on this without it seeming to cause too many marks, so that's exciting because I like to get things as pressed as possible. I am now working on the facings. So you see me ironing on the inner facing to the right side of the fabric, which is not normally how you do this, but I knew with my sensory issues, if I had this flocked fabric against my skin, it would make me want to scream. So I actually only wanted to have the backing of the fabric on me. So I'm actually going to be sewing these right to wrong sides with the right side having the inner facing on it. So that way the flocking never touches my skin, and I am thrilled about that. From there, I am turning over the edge by 1/4 of an inch and sewing it down to give me a nice clean edge on my facing. And now I get to get ready to put the facing on the actual bodice, but first I decided to go with lace after all, even though it definitely added to the expense of this garment and the time. So first I am basting on that lace, so that way I have a line to follow when I sew on the facing. With that, I am putting together wrong side of the fabric facing to the right side of the other facing with the lace sandwich in between. Hopefully that all makes sense. Again, as you see, the wrong side is technically where the inner facing is. That is just also the flock side. I do have to say, so far, one of my favorite parts of sewing is I can fix all the things that I find in 1940s clothing that make me miserable and get to still wear the same style. And from here, I am sewing the facing on. This is just with a simple usual seam allowance of, I think this is a 1/2 inch for this pattern. And then I'm going to clip my curves and also clip or whatever my corners. I feel like that's called something else besides clipping, but it's not coming to me. So I am basically getting this all ready to turn inside out. But first, before I take it to iron, I am going to do some understitching. This pattern doesn't call for understitching, but I always find it gives me so much cleaner of line, so it's something I'll always do, and it allows for me to check that the lace on the edge is going to sit the way I want it to. And from here, I am ironing the facings and the edging and all that. This is always tricky because of that curved sweetheart neckline. So it takes just a lot of patience and time to get everything right. And then here I am basting the scalloped edge, which is what the pattern tells me to do. However, I realized with the lace I needed to do things differently, so I got frustrated and ultimately called it for this project for the night. I did, however, first pick out button options because picking through buttons soothes my soul, and I needed a bit of soothing after feeling a little frustrated with this project. All right, we're gonna do something a little different for the check-in this morning. It is the next day indeed. Basically, I stopped my project at about 4 o'clock last night. It is usually when I try to stop, but also I was starting to get frustrated. And usually my rule is once you start to get frustrated with a project, you quit it because you're gonna do something stupid and once you're frustrated. So let me walk you through where I'm at right now. This is said project, obviously. It's looking pretty good. Where I was getting frustrated was figuring out how to do the scalloping here. And I just read the instructions and I was doing it all wrong last night, so that's great, I guess. So first things that I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to make my buttonholes. These are the buttons I've chosen for this project. I think they'll be super cute. There's some nice glass with like a gold around it. So that's what I'm going to start with, and then I think I'm going to work on the sleeves, and then I will get back to the scalloped edging because yes, the instructions for this are kind of confusing. So I'm going to put it off for a little bit. With being able to take a fresh look at things, the first thing I've decided to do is mark where my buttonholes go and figure that out. I am using my buttonhole gauge, and I marked where the top and the bottom button would go because I shortened this. The pattern is not accurate for the in-betweens, so that is why I'm using this handy dandy tool here. I got my buttonhole all set up, so I'm just going to sew through these buttonholes. I think my machine has 7 different buttonhole shapes, but I basically just used 2 for this project because of the scallops. I wanted to use the one with one rounded edge. I've decided to continue to avoid the part of the project that I got frustrated with last night and instead focus on the sleeves. I did remember to do French seam cutting for the sleeves. I am first French seaming the little tiny lines that keep the sleeve closed. And now here is the most stunning footage I've ever taken in my life of me putting in gathering stitches on a sleeve head. And one of the other reasons I decided to do the sleeves first is because I thought it would be a good way to practice the lace like fold down whatever technique that the bodice bottom would have, because this is just a straight edge. So I'm first, like the pattern suggests for the bodice, I am putting the lace sewing it up, so eventually you will turn it out and down. Before I turn it down though, I am again using that hemming tape that I used for the seam binding. I am now pressing the hem of the sleeve, and the explanation of the instructions on how you do the lace is making a lot more sense to me, and I'm feeling very encouraged and ready to tackle that bottom scalloped edge of the bodice. With the sleeve all done, I am now easing it into the sleeve head. I think technically this pattern was supposed to have no poofiness or pleats in it, but I have never been good at easing a perfect sleeve, so mine definitely does. Also, I altered this pattern so much that I don't even know. So yes, we have a little bit of wrinkles and I couldn't perfectly ease it in, but I'm still happy nonetheless. And here's even more thrilling footage showing me sewing the seam binding on the armhole. Sometimes my camera just doesn't do what I think it's going to. One of the things that frustrated me when I was trying to figure out how to do this last night was how you make it so there is no break in the trim around where the plackets, I guess, overlap. And upon rereading the instructions, I realized that you baste this down and then you just take the lace all the way around it, which makes total sense, and I feel a little silly for not knowing that. And now, since I've done the sleeve, I can do the bodice the exact same way. So I'm first sewing on the lace carefully to be pointed upward, so eventually I can press it downward. This just makes so much sense, and I now feel, I don't know, interesting, I guess, or silly for not being able to figure out how to do this before. But this is why sometimes you need to stop doing a project when you get frustrated and look at it with fresh eyes. Is with my fresh eyes, this became a lot more simple and less confusing. Now we're putting the theory to test with pressing this up. I have clipped the corners as they tell you to and all that, and I do think this technique worked really, really well. And my last step for now is just basting that press that I put in, just because I don't want that press to come out because I took so much time doing it. For some reason, I didn't show you any assembly of the skirt but this step, but it's a simple 6-gore skirt, and I am making it using French seaming. So here you have seen I have sewn the first seam, cut it down, and now I'm going to fold it and press it so then I can sew the second part of the seam that will give me those beautiful French seams. From there, I am putting in gathering stitches. I don't know why I chose a different thread color this time, but it was just the mood I was in. So I am stitching in this pink thread so I can really see my gathering stitches. From there, I am putting in the gathers, attaching it to the skirt, all that stuff. I mean bodice, not skirt. Attaching skirt and bodice, you could say. And I'm just making sure to match all the points and the seams and all that good stuff. It's a little bit challenging to gather something that has this shaping, but it worked out okay. It just took some time and patience. And for these, since you have to top stitch them, I first pin them from the back, repin them at the front, so that way I can actually stitch this from the top, which is what I'm doing here. I could have probably gotten a little closer to the edge on parts of these, but I always worry about going too far and then not catching the bodice at all. And now it's time for one of my favorite parts, which is pulling out those gathering stitches. It was extra fun with the contrasted thread. With the skirt attached, I can now pop in the zipper. I had a bit of a struggle getting my foot, as in my sewing foot, up but on the lace. For some reason it kept catching in it, which was quite annoying. And now I am putting in my label on the facing. I am almost out of these labels, so I just ordered some new ones that I'm excited about. And then the last thing I'm gonna do for today is to put on some fray check. It is after work on some day, I don't know which day, probably a Wednesday, maybe a Thursday, who knows. But I am putting in some hand stitching. First I'm hand stitching some of the parts of the facing down, keeping it tacked down only on seams. That way it won't pop out of the top of the dress or anything like that. I am also opening my buttonholes. I have to say, using fray check is so much better when you actually let it dry, which yes, I know you're supposed to always let it dry, but sometimes I can't help myself, but it's been several days since I put the fray check on, so it's working great for me. And then I'm sewing on these buttons. These are a nice shank glass button that has a little gold ring and like some nice texture details to them. Obviously from my stash, I'm pretty rarely allowed to buy new buttons. I try to use what's in my stash. From here, I am prepping the hem. I've tried it on, I've seen how it fits, and it just needs a little bit of hemming. And since this is a curved skirt, what I'm first gonna do is sew down that raw edge by turning it up 1/4 inch. But then after that, I'm gonna go back through and put in basting stitches, so that way I can ease the hem into the dress. Once that is eased and pressed, I am hand sewing it. I have plenty of videos that show me doing the easing process on camera, and I just kind of felt like skipping showing you the ironing board step right at this moment. My last step is cheating where the lace like flipping trick didn't work perfectly. This is actually really brilliant, and I am glad I learned this technique. However, because it was my first time doing it, some of the lace didn't actually turn correctly, so I am hand stitching it down in a semi-rigged fashion. It gets the job done, and it's not like anyone can really tell. And with that, we are going to hop into the reveal. Alright, you have seen the reveal. How I styled this in the reveal is exactly how I styled it when I wore it to work, so we're not going to have any style updates this video, but of course we'll have the cost breakdown and my final thoughts on this project. So first, for the cost breakdown, this is my first dress officially under $50 because I paid for every single bit of the supplies. So let's review the cost of this dress. The fabric, I used 2 3/8 of this fabric yardage wise. I'm gonna go ahead and donate the rest of it at $4.75. Pretty cheap for fabric. I got this at a reuse center that was selling it for $2 a yard. I did get this towards the beginning of my sewing journey. Now the same reuse center charges $3 a yard, so it might be a little more complex for me to get this for as good of a price. As far as notions is where I spent all my money. So I spent probably about $5 on the thread and the interfacing and all that stuff. However, the lace I spent $16.75 on. If you skipped the lace of this, you actually would save like $17. And then the buttons I used on this are nice high quality glass buttons that I paid $10.92 for. So this was like pretty expensive notions wise, but I feel like the notions are part of what makes this dress really special. So I feel pretty happy with that. My notions were $29.67. If I had used just a plainer button, you also probably could have you could probably knock $25 off this project if you used cheaper notions or skipped the trim. And then the pattern was $12.85. That brings us to a total, like a supply total of $47.27. I poked around quickly online and found similar-ish style dresses on unnamed vintage retro inspired fast fashion sites. I'm never gonna show you the images of the things I find because I'm never gonna recommend to you a fast fashion brand. For similar price, around between $49 and I think they went about as high as $92, and you are talking things with cheap notions and cheap fabric. That was usually polyester. You're talking about an item that is much less well made and less quality than what I produced. So that is just kind of one of the comparisons I want to make this year, is how much you can sew affordably if you're resourceful about where you get your supplies. One of the big things is getting your supplies secondhand. I get most of my secondhand supplies online. However, you can find them at shops. So as far as labor of this, I spent 10 hours and 30 minutes on this. In theory, when you make a dress like this, your most expensive thing should be the labor. Because of the wealth imbalances across the world, right now labor is not the most expensive thing that the garment industry is spending their money on, but it's usually materials. However, for me, my biggest expense was the labor. 10.5 hours was basically my whole weekend, right? So I gave up my whole weekend to be able to make this dress. And then here we talk about living wages. So I'm going to use Seattle's living wage, which calculates at $35.39 per hour. And I'm going to multiply that by that 10.5 hours. So if I was like making a living wage to make this dress, I would have needed to be paid $371.60. I want to be clear, this is not a one-to-one for factory manufacturing. Obviously, they have faster, higher level of machines. I don't have an industrial machine. I don't have a lot of those tools that I have access to. I'm not working in like assembly line type thing. So of course they can make items like this quicker than I can. However, again, labor should still be the biggest cost of anything you have made, because at the end of the day, you need a sewer to man those sewing machines. They cannot be done by robots. That labor cost is huge, right? And again, that is my most expensive thing that I used here. If you're in the working class, the most expensive thing you own is your time and your labor. That is your biggest resource, and that is the resource that you're being paid for when you work. So once you total up my supply total plus my labor costs, it would be $418.87 for you to sell this at living wage price, essentially, for me to sell this. And I also poked around on the internet. I will say slow fashion brands that I trust their labor practices have dresses are like this, kind of around like the $250 mark, which means of course they're able to use all those aforementioned techniques to get their things sewn quicker while paying their garment workers a living wage. So you likely would not be this much money for something this high quality and slow fashion, but it is what I would have to sell it at if I was to sell my own product. Actually, that's what I would need to sell to pay myself a living wage. You're usually supposed to tack on like 40 to 60% profit. So that is kind of our labor breakdown. Hopefully it made you think. That is the main intention of these. They're not supposed to be like 100% accurate, but I just want to prove, like especially with this $50 and under supply marker, that you can make a really, really high quality dress for yourself for the amount it would cost for you to buy something that's fast fashion and is likely made with unethical labor. Here is the dress. Oh, I didn't zip her up. I wore her yesterday to work and I felt so flirty and fun in it. No one complimented me though, which I'm very salty about because I think this is one of my best pieces recently. I love the lace. I love the way the lace emphasizes the scalloped waistline because the scalloped waistline was the hardest part of the dress to make and is the most like unique and special feature about it. It's why I selected this pattern. I think the lace was a great addition. As far as sewing errors, I could have probably eased the sleeves in a tiny bit better, and then I did have to at the end put in some cheating stitches to get the lace to lay flat. But yeah, this is so high quality with the glass buttons and the cotton and the flocked flowers. I feel adorable in this dress, and I think this dress is actually really appropriate for a lot of seasons. I think it goes really well into winter if you're a winter floral wearer like I am, but I also think it'll work fantastic in the spring and summer. I also am very happy I made those modifications for the arms. The arms are super comfy for me. I will say they're a little tight when I do this or this. But that is honestly quite typical for vintage clothing because I don't know, they had smaller arms, they didn't move their arms. I don't know, different body types, you know. I don't have many complaints about this dress. I think it is pretty much perfect and I'm really happy. I'll pop up a photo here. I had to declutter, unfortunately, one of my favorite navy dresses I made kind of like this one because the side zip here, which this is why I don't do side zips even though this has like the button down front. The reason I have a back zip is side zips here are not accessible for me. Zipping in this motion can sometimes make my hand go numb. Also, like getting in and out, sometimes I don't have enough flexibility in my shoulders to get in and out of a dress like that. So this is like a better option for me. Where was I going with this? Because of that lack of accessibility plans in the old dress, I wasn't able to wear the old dress again, and I was pretty bummed about decluttering it because I think it probably would fit me if I could get into it without potentially like causing a big muscle spasm flare up. So I am really happy to have this because I like this even better than that one. I'm even prouder of this one than that one, which that one I made, gosh, is it like 2 years ago? I'm really happy with that. I have this one to replace it with, and now I feel a little less sad. I did finally sell that one off actually recently. So that basically wraps up this video. I would love to hear what you guys think about like this $50 and under supply project. I'm trying to do 1 out of 3 like this, so let me know what you think. I do want to challenge myself to maybe do a couple under $25, which seems pretty crazy, but I am confident I can make something high quality and that I'm proud of under that budget. So we will see if at some point that is to come. And just a reminder that I do have both a Patreon and a Ko-Fi, which with the Ko-Fi, make sure you're hitting the membership button and not the one-time donation if you want the membership. That is going to give you access both on Ko-Fi and Patreon to early releases. I try to post weekend project updates. I've not been so great about it, but I'm getting back on my game this weekend. And then what's the last thing I post over there? Oh, polls for future projects. I feel like the people who are paying me monthly should have the most control over projects on this channel. So I put a lot of polls over there on what we are going to move towards in the future on what I am actually going to work on as a project. So if you want all that, you can find it over there. And then of course, if you can't financially support me, that is a-okay. I am not ever going to be putting videos behind a paywall. You will always have access every Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, and you can support me by liking my videos, commenting down below. I also love reading your comments. It's a lot of good fun for me. Of course, if you have made it this far, please subscribe. I think that means you enjoy me and this channel, so I would love to have you stick around, and I will see you next week. Bye!